Today we're going to be going over ethos, pathos, and logos, the holy trinity of rhetorical persuasion. These terms were first coined by Aristotle in ancient Greece when the study of rhetoric first emerged, mostly because it was becoming important in a newly found democracy to be able to convince one another. And this is the attempt to try and make a bit of a science of it. In using these three terms, I'm going to try and separate them as distinctly as I can. That way you understand what I mean by when I use the terms. However, in practice, a lot of times these terms are these strategies are used in Congress. A lot of times ethos, pathos, and logos will be used together, and if one type of arguing seems both ethosy and logosy, that makes sense to me. The whole point of this presentation is just to be able to clearly distinguish the terms and understand what I mean when I use them. Pathos, it would be an appeal to your emotion. It's the heart, you could say. It evokes your imagination, your passion, your instinct, what might feel right using your gut. If someone tries to excite you to a cause by maybe using sort of rage or sympathy or their sex appeal, they're using pathos to try and convince you. Oftentimes we act on pathos even though our better judgment tells us not to. It's very much part of the human condition, which we'll talk about more. So pathos is often used, particularly in visuals for advertising. For instance, you'll never see a car commercial with lots of traffic, even though we logically know that when we buy the car, traffic isn't just going to evaporate. We still get that feeling that driving around in this car is fun and zooming around. Similarly, we are inspired by sort of the confidence in Rosie the Riveter's face. We think that when we buy a Bud Light, suddenly we're at the party. And when we look into the eyes of children that need our help on the other side of the world, we can't help but act. And she's clearly excited about something. All right. If pathos is the heart, logos is the head, the cold, calculating, good reasoning, using good logic, and argumentative consistency. And when I say argumentative consistency, I mean that you're not contradicting yourself in any kind of way. And we'll talk a lot in this unit about what argumentative consistency means. But for now, just think of it as using cold, hard data to prove your point, or just having a conclusion that naturally follows from your premises. So examples of logos might be thinking like Spock, the classic Star Trek character. He was free of emotion, and so oftentimes he was the clearest head in the room. Sometimes to clarify, things, we might use logical tools like, notation, which you'll learn if you ever take philosophy or computer science, or, Venn diagrams. And these are ways of abstracting. So rather than using the specific thing, like if you're a boy, then you're a human, we try to abstract them into sterile variables, just like we do in math. You might think of using logos as a way to mathematize, if that's a word. It's not, your thought process. Ethos is typically defined as an appeal to ethics, trusting the character of the speaker. I don't think that this is the most complete way to define the term, because it can be a bit misleading, because you can think it has to do with morality in some way, because a lot of times we use the words ethics interchangeably with morality, and I think that's can be a bit misleading. There's a better definition, I think. Ethos is a Greek word meaning character that is used to describe the guiding beliefs or ideals that characterize a community. Ethos originally meant a custom place, custom, habit, equivalent to Latin mores. Another way of maybe describing mores might be what are the norms, what are the normal things or practices of a society. And I think that's a really good way of understanding what ethos is. Our community has certain things that we as a whole generally trust. So there might be certain practices that we trust, or there might be certain kinds of people that we in general trust. So obviously we trust doctors with our health. In general, we trust teachers with topic sentences and thesis statements, or anything else that they might be trying to teach you. We might trust your mechanic with your car. But similarly, there's also things that we, as a community, generally trust. Like within scientific communities, there are certain numbers that they deem trustworthy for scientific experimentation. And that's not because those numbers, that threshold for proof, just sort of fell out of the sky, but rather it's just what at a certain point we all kind of feel and all have agreed upon is a trustworthy threshold. And there's some mathematical reasons behind that, but there's no sort of light that goes off that says, okay, we can trust it. It's something that just we as a group seem to all agree on is trustworthy. And I use Wikipedia as a source a bit ironically, but also intentionally, to mention the fact that Wikipedia, in several studies, has been shown to be more reliable than quote-unquote normal encyclopedias like the Encyclopedia Britannica. However, it can also be changed by most anybody, but they usually have editors that can sort of change it back pretty quickly. But it makes its ethos, its credibility, a little up in the air. On the whole, it's more reliable, but it also is more vulnerable for sort of last minute changes. And so that makes a lot of people uncomfortable in how they use Wikipedia. So just to recap, our better definition of ethos might be to appeal to what is typically considered trustworthy by your community. This might be sincerity, just trusting the person, expert opinion, the norms of evidential support, practices that we all normally agree on. And our page of ethos, we have experts, scientists that look like they're having a lot of fun. And I use this because someone shaking their hand and giving you good eye contact and having sort of what we might consider all the normal facial expressions would be another way of eliciting the norms of trustworthiness within our society. So in talking about ethos, pathos, and logos, we might wonder which is most important. And it would be natural for us to say Logos, right? Wouldn't it be better if we all thought like Spock? Many of the incorrect ways of thinking that we will discuss in this unit will involve violating sound logic in favor of trusting someone inappropriately or just using emotions to make a poor decision. Oftentimes, our emotional states will lead us astray, and that's a common knowledge. And I think it's true that in general, the world would work better if we were more logical. However, they all are very important. Let's take this logical argument. Premise 1, all people have value. Premise 2, Mike is a person. Therefore, Mike has value. A very simple syllogism. We'll talk more about what these things mean later. But if you look at these three things, especially these premises, how we will support some of these premises are reliant on ethos, pathos, and logos. Let's look at premise number 1. How do we know that all people have value? Well, value can't be determined by logic alone. At some point, we just see it as valuable, and we can't argue any further. And this I just see it quality pertains to how we often build premises. Premises are the steps within our arguments. We use pathos and ethos to create claims we find obviously true, and then from those, we build our argument using logos. So let's take the same logical argument. All people have value, Mike is a person. How do we know that Mike is a person? Maybe he's a hologram, maybe he's part of a dream or a robot. But that all seems pretty unlikely. Because he looks and acts in all the usual ways a person does, I trust that he's a human without any more argument. So in this sense, I'm using ethos. And so in thinking about how I'm supporting the premises of this argument, all people have value, I can see that either by searching my emotions every time I look at a person. I just can't help but feel that they have value. Or maybe I don't feel that way. Maybe I'm a little cold-hearted. But all the same, I've been raised in a society that has told me that over and over again, and to contradict that would be some kind of blasphemy. And so the idea that all people have value is either being supported by ethos, pathos, or both. And the idea that Mike is a person, I'm not going to ever be able to sort of like cut open his brain and run a whole bunch of tests. I just run into Mike and I'm like, he seems to be going along with sort of all the things that a typical person would do, and what my community generally agrees upon constitutes personhood, what makes you a person. Therefore, Mike is a person. That's enough. And then from using pathos and ethos to establish these premises, I can then use logic to come up with this conclusion that Mike has value. Now, this is not to say that every premise is going to be based on pathos or ethos. There are some premises that might be based on logos also. But my whole point here is that ethos and pathos are kind of argumentative bedrock. They're the foundation upon which we build our logical house. And this makes sense also within sort of the timeline that we'll also hear arguments. The speaker early on should establish our trust, outline their premises that are uncontroversial amongst the community, and then appeal to what we care about to motivate us. So a lot of times, it's in the beginning of arguments that we're going to have appeals to ethos and pathos, and then the rest of it will be using logos. And then a lot of times at the end of an argument, we might have a final hurrah pathos punch to try and motivate us to action. So in conclusion, ethos, pathos, and logos are three incredibly valuable ways to distinguish the strategies that the speaker is trying to use to convince us.